Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to be bringing everyone together today to discuss opportunities to mobilize private capital to reduce methane from the waste sector. We've got a great panel discussion lined up and just published the results from over a year of research and convenings with experts across the industry. And we'll be bringing some of those insights to you today, both from findings from our publication as well as a great panel discussion. I'll provide a brief overview of today's webinar, tee up the topic, introduce the speakers, and then hand it off to my colleague Shravan Bhat, who will be presenting some of the key insights from our research and publication over this past year. And then on to the main focus of the webinar, we'll have a panel discussion with representatives from the industry, including Carolina Urmaneta from the Global Methane Hub, Zhao Tang from the Catalytic Finance Foundation, and Adam Gibbon from BNP Paribas, before I wrap up with some takeaways at the end. Next. So this past year, RMI created a network of some 30 private investors and an expert advisory group to better understand why waste methane technologies were mature and proven globally, but received insufficient funding, particularly, or insufficient financing, particularly in the Global South, with the mitigation benefits often going unaccounted for. The results of this research and convenings were published this past Friday, and there's a link in the chat, I believe. It includes mapping of investment archetypes, investment sizings, and insights from financial institutions by region. Next. This slide shows a timeline for this project, kicking off this past year with convenings on the periphery of the annual meeting of the Inter-American Development Bank in Santiago, and ending this past February in Cape Town at the Africa Green Economy Summit in February. Below are some of those recommendations from this project to improve opportunities in emerging markets for waste methane reductions. Includes things like supporting and enabling bankable pipeline, investing resources in better carbon accounting, and tailoring funds for the waste sector's unique needs. Next, I'll hand it off to my colleague Shravan to share some of those insights that we gained from these convenings over the past year. Shravan?
Thank you. All right. I'm going to condense a year and a half of work and 100 slides into 5 minutes, so stay with me. The problem we're trying to solve is that these technologies have not been able to attract private investment at scale, particularly in the Global South. That's anaerobic digesters and landfill gas to energy especially, but some other ones as well. Some of the reasons behind this basically boils down to the fact that very often private investors are unable to price and to overcome some of the unique risks with these deals. And you see a few of them over here, and there's a lot more in our briefing book. So we made this resource for a lot of stakeholder groups, but it's primarily for private institutions, so regional banks, private equity firms, what have you. A, to engage existing clients in the waste industry, but also B, to help them diligence deals that they may be seeing coming across their desks. And we've tried to look at 3 regions, so Latin America and the Caribbean, Nigeria, and Southeast Asia. This exercise has primarily been about prioritization. Where should private investors really start and really focus? And we think that along the value chain, that's more on the mitigation technology side, which you see there on the right. And then if I were to say, geographically, where should they try to prioritize? We've tried to boil everything down into this 2x2 matrix. And on the landing page link that you would see in the chat, there's an interactive version of this that I would encourage you to go and play around with afterwards. But essentially, we're saying the best mix of relatively higher impact to relatively lower risk is what you see on the top left-hand side over there. Sao Paulo, Santiago, Monterrey, Manila, Penang, and Bangkok, we think are the places that are generally primed, and we will explain why. So rather than going through all of those, I want to just take one example, which is Penang, Malaysia, and show you our general analysis that we've used everywhere. So We start at the policy level and try to make the case for why is Malaysia a good place for investors to look at, especially from an enabling environment perspective. And then we go one level deeper and say, okay, within Malaysia, why Penang? And why is it primed to help investors overcome a lot of the risks that we saw earlier on in the presentation? And then to look at the upside and say, okay, what, why is a commodity like biomethane, why do we think that there are meaningful financial returns to be made here? And trying to make a case for that too. And then we end every geographic section by saying, okay, if you're a private investor, you're in this space, who can you partner with and to help you, especially to de-risk these deals? And so one example is if you partner with an international technology provider, can you get maybe a loan guarantee from the export credit agency of that specific country? And we've done this for all those regions that I had mentioned earlier. And so to sort of to put this into context in a timeline, on the left-hand side there, you see what we generally think the private market should be doing today, which is for the emerging technologies like, Black Soldier Fly. That's where really venture capital can be leading. Whereas for, more mature technologies like landfill gas to energy and stuff, regional banks can really lead. And then over on the right-hand side, you're seeing where would we like the market to be 2030 onwards? And that's where what was considered innovative today is now regularly being done in the bank market and by private equity firms. And more mature technologies no longer really need help from concessional capital and so on. And how do we get there? So that's what you see in the dark blue in the middle. I'd say there's sort of three related activities of work. One is providing technical assistance to municipalities and to developers to really get a credible, bankable pipeline of, 20, 30, 100 deals globally. Alongside that, increasing how much revenues they can get from selling carbon credits, and then increasing how much financing is available, particularly concessional financing. And just to give you a teaser of what else is in the deck, so here's an example of the technical assistance that I was mentioning. Can we scale things like PPFs on the carbon credits? Can we create alliances of large carbon credit buyers like we've seen for sustainable aviation fuel as an example? And then can we create a suite of tools, everything from grants, concessional loans, and so on the blended finance side of the house. So that's a whirlwind overview. I'm now going to hand over to Tom and to our excellent panel to go one level deeper. Tom, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Shravan. Our first question is for Carolina Urmeneta with the Global Methane Hub. And I'm hoping you could, talk a little bit about GMH's role in this space, perhaps starting with the introduction of the hub in case folks aren't familiar. And how do you work with private companies and private investors to bring them into the space to help support reductions of methane from waste?
Thank you, Tom, and congratulations to the RMI team, right, for this great report and the presentation, right? Almost impossible to present this type of things in such a short time. So thank you for that. Carolina Urmeneta from the Global Methane Hub. I am the program director for waste and circular economy, so working close with RMI and others in order to mobilize methane mitigation through the sector. The Global Methane Hub is a philanthropic effort to support methane mitigation, considering or based on the Global Methane Pledge agreement that we have, and also in how we can use the methane mitigation opportunity in a short-term period to reduce the overshooting on temperature that we are getting, right? So that's the point. The waste sector is a huge opportunity in this discussion because the solutions are there, right? And as you were presenting, Tom and Shravan, what we need is to work on implementation, and we need is to mobilize, different actors. So how we, Global Methane Hub, as a philanthropic effort, support the mobilization is through different type of actions, right? One is on data, MRV, and transparency. And on that, we are working, in fact, with RMI, Google Foundation, and many others on a platform that it's an open source platform where you can see the methane emissions from landfills and dam sites also, right? Why this is important? Because you can see the emissions from a remote sense technology like satellites or other technologies. And with this, we bring attention to the sector, and we also can realize that we are leakaging energy, right? That we can use, as you were saying, right? So we provide and we support organizations to provide this type of data to support authorities and also different actors to make action, right? And when we talk about action, it's not just to get the mobilization, right? Because we know, for example, that in the waste sector, 80% of the actions that we can do in order to reduce methane emissions are cost effective. So why they are not implemented? Because we don't have good policies, because we don't have good pathways, and because there is an issue with the finance models that we are considering, right? So what else do we do? And I'm going to talk about a specific example, and then I'm going to provide others in the second half of the webinar, is, for example, you were mentioning carbon markets, right? So we support governments, right, at national or subnational level to have clear pathways in how they might use carbon markets, right? There are concrete examples, for example, in Chile, where they publish a roadmap considering, for example, landfill biogas capture and anaerobic digestion as an opportunity for carbon markets, right? That roadmap was announced at COP30 last year, and that was in November, December, and then in January, they approved 5 projects through a bilateral collaboration with Switzerland, right? One of those projects was a landfill with an increased efficiency on biogas capture, right? That allow the country to mobilize investment and, of course, reduce methane mitigation, right? So those type of things are the things that we do in order to support the action and to support the private sector to mobilize. Of course, as a philanthropy, we don't support directly the private sector, but we support this type of policies, data, and tools for them to mobilize and to use the opportunity that we have in front of us. So that's my answer, Tom.
No, that's great. Clearly the hub is in a unique role of trying to weave together, financing, multilateral development banks, financial institutions, governments, NGOs. So it's really helpful to hear kind of how you're trying to bring this broader group of folks to the table. And on that end, I will hand it off next to Adam. My next question is for Adam from a financial institution. I was hoping you could walk us a bit through the farm carbon deal, which is a great example of an investment that you've made in methane mitigation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. Thanks for RMA for having me here today. I'm delighted to present some of the work we've been doing here at BNP Paribas. So as by way of a quick introduction, my name's Adam Gibbon, and I'm the natural capital lead here at BNP Paribas. So I manage a $560 million private equity and project financing fund. And with that fund, we invest in a range of natural capital solutions that could go from tree planting, forest management, soils, but importantly for this conversation, what we refer to broadly as household devices. So these are devices at the smaller end of the spectrum for households or small farms that are either reducing CO2 emissions or capturing methane. So at that sleeve of the fund, we were able to do this investment in Farm Carbon Co. To tell you a bit about that, I'll just step back and introduce the company behind it, which is Sistema Bio, and the problem that they're trying to solve. So Sistema Bio are a manufacturer and distributor of small-scale biodigesters. They have hubs in Colombia, Mexico, India, and Kenya, with operations in over 50 countries. This company's been going a while, founded in 2010, so over 16 years of operations now. The challenge that they're trying to address is that today there's around 2 billion people on the 580 million small farms around the world. They produce 30% of the world's food, but they have very limited availability to technology or finance to deal with methane emissions from manure. So typically they're just left on the ground or in slurry pits, leading to significant emissions. So Sistema's solution is to manufacture and distribute these digesters in small modular units that can be that can reach these farmers. The methane is anaerobically digested, captured, and used to produce biogas, which feeds into a household and replaces the unsustainable fuel wood use that happens today. It also produces a biofertilizer, which reduces the need for synthetic chemical fertilizers. Because of that methane capture, we're able to generate carbon credits. The carbon credits subsidize the price that the farmers pay for the biodigesters. These would not be affordable, nor would the credit without this. And it works. Today, we've got over 150,000 units installed and over 2 million tons of CO2 equivalent in terms of emissions reductions. The deal itself that we came up with was to really accelerate what they've been doing. So I think I mentioned we already had a stake in the topco. We have an equity stake. So we've seen from the inside out how this company is scaling. We've used that money to build out manufacturing facilities and get this footprint around the world. And then we worked with them to structure an off-balance sheet, carbon-backed blended finance vehicle. So ticking a number of those boxes that were in the bridge that was shown in the previous slide. And just to go quickly through each of those. So off-balance sheet, we moved this off the balance sheet of the manufacturing and distribution company so that we could isolate the carbon market risk and promote that to specific investors ourselves who are interested in actually getting exposure to that. Carbon backed. So the way Farm Carbon Co's business model works is that once they have a biodigester operational and in the ground, they will forward sell to a reputable off-taker a long stream of carbon credit offtake. Once they have that in place, biodigester in the ground and long-term offtake, we then provide financing to reimburse the operational company for the biodigester and then split the profits with them that accrue over time. And finally, the blended element. So there, in this particular role, we're providing senior financing in the capital stack of Farm Carbon Co alongside the UK government through BII. But we're grateful to also have in that capital structure junior capital from BII and Shell Foundation to support some of the risk that's being taken on the market. And yeah, we're excited. We hope tens of millions will be flowing through this over the years to come.
Yeah, that's a really interesting deal. And, I think working with lots of small farms to encourage, better management of organics and also recover energy is, really analogous to the situation with organic waste management. As, working throughout communities, it's really quite distributed. I'm wondering, what are some things you really liked about this deal, especially those things that you think might be applicable more broadly?
Yeah, I could take, three examples that from your report in terms of major risk factors that you highlighted that I think we deal with well in this structure. First was construction delays. So as I described from an investment point of view, we only pay once they're installed. That we only provide this financing. Obviously, that does require the startup equity. That requires the equity capital in the topco. But from our particular financing perspective here in this vehicle, that is a definite thing we like about it. Your report raised the issue of operational disruptions. Well, we have a distributed network of biodigesters across multiple countries and multiple regions. So there's no single point of failure here in terms of the production of the benefits of the methane capture or the crediting. And revenue uncertainty. So we carefully support the Farm Carbon Co and carefully screening the buyers of the credits. So we need, for high credit worthiness of counterparty and also contractual robustness so that the offtake contract that's signed for the carbon, we have high confidence that it will deliver. We're also seeing increasing interest from nations, from governments under the UNFCCC and Article 6 So that's another exciting route. And then I guess very quickly for our fund, why we like this, short cash flows. So the money goes in, but the benefit, we're an impact focused fund, the impact happens very quickly, and then the revenues happen very quickly. That balances out some of the deeper J curve deals that we have through our tree planting activities. And in terms of carbon credit production, the methane credits are relatively low cost amongst the spectrum. And I think if you compare, say, engineered removals like direct air capture, like very, very low cost compared to that. So that means that we can have a high impact. It means that when the market's tight, we can still make returns. And when we expect in the future there's going to be a significant supply-demand imbalance, we should be able to get significant upside. So yeah, a couple more. There's a couple of examples of why we really like this.
No, that's really helpful. I mean, these deals can be quite complex. So it's helpful to kind of hear, what are things that worked well, especially those things that could be applicable more broadly across the waste sector. And I guess to that point, my next question is for Zhao. I'm curious, if you could talk a bit about companies or cities that you've worked with in emerging markets, how they could overcome bankability barriers, and how blended finance can best be deployed to mitigate risk in the waste sector, especially waste methane mitigation.
Thank you, Tom. And again, congratulations to the completion of the publication. I think it really highlights many of the conversations we've been having in the last more than 2 decades. I want to start with a quick introduction, why I'm here and why we're talking about this. So I'm working for Catalytic Finance Foundation, short for Catalytic. We are a Swiss-based not-for-profit independent foundation. Our theory of change is really to bring the supply of impactful projects towards finance and bring finance towards projects to really address, the very often chicken and egg problem of having enough pipeline, not enough pipeline, enough finance, not enough finance. So that's the core of what we do. And part of what we do to achieve that is to use blended finance at different levels to address those questions. So, for example, from the finance end, we try to design and create and really incubate those blended finance or catalytic finance mechanisms to attract finance at scale. On the other end, we also deploy grant-funded technical assistance, project preparation, which you mentioned in the report as well, which helps build pipeline and help de-risk projects from technological, market, and legal point of view. So part of what we do related to waste is touching on this point. One, we do have several project preparation facilities, which are building pipelines of projects that are aiming at mitigation, climate mitigation. So waste, obviously, being one of the largest emitters of methane, is one of the sectors we address. So we build pipeline, so we can see actually through this pipeline of projects the nature and characteristics, and including financial data of those projects in the emerging market, global south, but also at the design and the fund level, we have been trying to design a mechanism that could address some of the barriers to finance, some of the barriers to attracting a larger amount of financial flow towards waste methane reduction projects in developing countries. And I will talk about those barriers just very quickly. So I think this also builds on what Adam has mentioned and some of the risks. To add on that, I think some of the risks or barriers to bankability in the global south can be really categorized into three categories. One is the certainty of profitability. So that means how certain are we? So if I were a bank, I want to see how certain is this business going to generate revenue, therefore to cover the costs of operation, the financing cost. So that's a big one. Secondly, banks would like to see the balance sheet of the borrower. So very often the companies that are building waste management projects don't really have collaterals or big balance sheet to back them up. And thirdly, there's also the question of track record. We've seen many actually ambitions from project developers who have built similar infrastructure projects like roads, airports, but this is another kind of chicken and egg problem when project developers don't really have such a long track record or at all in having executed a 15 to 20 years of waste infrastructure projects. So those are the three kind of high level bankability barriers. And here I'm really focusing on municipal solid waste because it's a mixed stream, and usually in developing countries, those wastes are mixed, adding to the complexity of the revenue streams. So if we look at, and that's what we have done in the last year, we have looked at the financial models of many projects that have come across for our design work. We have seen that in almost all the projects, there is a gap. The gap at OPEX level, at OPEX plus financing cost level, and OPEX plus bank financing plus equity. So typically, we're looking at a gap between 15 to 30, I would say, assuming there's no gate fee. So the gate fee is something that's like a service fee a municipality typically would pay if they have, for example, in Europe, where we live, a gate fee of somewhere between 50 to 200, depending on the type of waste infrastructure. But this level of gate fee doesn't really exist in developing countries. We're seeing either from 0 to maximum 10, 15, in some cases 20 in Latin America. So we are starting with $15 per ton of waste, a certain scale of infrastructure, right? Between 15 to 30. And some of the projects have in the past, and it's a small percentage of projects, secured carbon financing, but that doesn't cover the cost. So in our calculation, I wouldn't go into detail, but just to give a ballpark figure, we're still seeing, even with the current voluntary market carbon price, there's still a gap. There's still a gap between, let's say, $7-8 to 25, depending on the technology. So our model is really to look at how we can use blended finance to address such a gap for the time being, because we do believe, as other panelists have pointed out, that blended finance is a transitional solution. We would like to see the market play its role eventually. So we look at what kind of risks or the barriers can be covered by a certain type of blended finance. In general, I think the PPF facility is really important in de-risking and building pipeline, but also blended finance would give the time and opportunity for projects to build track record. Now, looking at the three barriers that have been mentioned, our mechanism is looking at addressing the certainty of profitability. So we're looking at how we can provide offtake guarantee to a certain type of revenue. So currently, many of the revenues that's supporting waste infrastructure are not really guaranteed for the long term. Long term meaning the lifetime of a project, 15 to 20 years. It doesn't really exist even the gate fee if there's any. And secondly, how can we bridge that gap using the value of methane in the short term to provide a premium price? And thirdly, we do believe that carbon finance or carbon credit, the price will increase, looking at how the whole market is moving. So I will mention a bit more on the carbon finance piece in the second half of the session, but we basically look at each type of risks and see how we can design a type of blended finance to address a type of risk. So the certainty of profitability is just one of the risks that we can use a kind of long-term offtake guarantee to reduce. But there are other risks too, but I would just focus on this one at this moment.
Thank you, Joe. That's really helpful. And I like that you spoke to, in this field and coming, from the perspective of a waste person, not a finance person, these terms could either be confusing or we kind of use them without fully knowing what they mean. And so, blended finance is something we hear a lot about. And it was really helpful to hear you kind of explain how you're kind of piecing together a number of types of financing with kind of different flavors and different rules that help reduce and kind of mitigate different types of risks. And I was wondering if another term I would like to hear, and this is for the panel as a whole, when you talk about bankability, and I think we've referenced building a pipeline earlier. Um, just in short, what is bankable to you? And I might actually kind of hand it off to Adam next to hear what bankable means for BNP.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, bankability for us, I think, comes down to a few things. First of all, the operational robustness of the topco, because you can do what you want in financial models and carbon models, but the topco has to be able to deliver what they say they're going to deliver. So I think in this case of Sistema, we had like I said, an equity stake is relatively unusual. It's our model, but that's how we do it, equity and then project finance. So then that gave us a really good view on the operationals. Our biodigesters in this case are relatively straightforward. The geomembranes, they're not super technical. They don't take the relatively easy to repair and service, etc. So I think operationally we can get quite comfortable with them. And then on the finance side of things, it's really around the quality of that offtake, which comes back to often to the quality of the credit, the higher quality carbon credit in terms of, I can go into details on that later, but the higher quality there, the better prices we're able to get, pairing that with the long-term offtake. That's how we really see things that are at bankable scale, they're a bankable stage, and finally just scale. So it's obviously fund dependent, but our fund is looking to do deals, project financing deals in the tens of millions. It has to be big enough. That's how we look at the bankability.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And the reason why I wanted to ask both of you is because I think there's probably some fundamentals of bankability, but it's also very much in the eye of the beholder. Each financing institution has a different take on that. So would love to hear from Zhao, kind of from your perspective, what does bankability look like?
So I'm not a bank. Maybe I can provide a more kind of general input. And because the kind of projects we're looking at waste methane reduction from the waste sector are typically infrastructure projects. So earlier we mentioned the difference between, or in your report, venture capital and mature technology. And here, if we look at landfill gas capture, AD, biogas, or MBT, those are typically mature technologies. For financiers, these are infrastructure projects, right? So, and typically for infrastructure projects, there is a component. Let's say you have a capex of 20 million for a plant. Usually, 70 to 80% of that 20 million is financed by a bank. And still, there's a need for a certain amount of equity. Sorry to bring in another topic that we need to explain. But what we have seen is that, banks would want to see, which I mentioned earlier as well, the business model, whether the company has any assets as collaterals, and track record. And track record really refers to what Adam has mentioned, whether the project can deliver what it has promised to the bank to deliver, revenue, or for impact investors also impact. So those are typically the kind of things, high level, whether it's going to, how certain is this business going to make money, like have profit enough to pay back the interest of my loan. And secondly, if it cannot at some point, does it have any valuable asset that I can take as a compensation? And third, has it done it before? If not, then as a bank, I will be running quite a lot of risks, uncertain, like high level of risks, because I don't know if they can deliver. So I will still go back to these 3 points on to define, bankability at a general level.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And you're right. Even kind of defining what is and what isn't a bank can be awfully confusing sometimes, for me at least. So that's very helpful. My next question is for Carolina. I know that the Global Methane Hub, really since its inception, and trying to support countries in meeting their global methane pledges, you've been having conversations with the financial community, from multilateral development banks, aid agencies, and private financial institutions. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of those conversations you're having, like who are you talking to, and what are some of the questions that they're asking or concerns that they have for participating more fully in this space?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And the previous discussion, right, regarding blending finance and how to support the waste sector, right? Because that's what we discussed like years ago, right? We started with the Global Methane Hub in 2022, but of course the discussion was before that, right, on how to mobilize funds to the sector and how to target the funds in a way that we can talk about, I don't know, integrate waste management system facilities, right? Not just landfills without methane capture or no segregation or things like that, right? So as you were saying, right, we support governments in order to have clear policies and clear priorities on what we need to do, but also in terms of the MDBs, right? We started our collaboration with MDBs because they do work based on the policies, based on the priorities of the countries, and they do support countries in order to get blend finance, as Jao was saying, for the sector and for other sectors, right? So one of our first initiatives and partnerships back to 2022, I would say, was with the Inter-American Development Bank, right? And we developed this initiative that is called Too Good to Waste, right? Which has a specific target on methane mitigation, 30% methane mitigation by 2030 from the waste portfolio at the Inter-American Development Bank. And this means that we support them in order to have better methodologies and to understand the data and the proposals, the facility, like the feasibility studies that subnational governments might present or other organizations to prioritize methane mitigation, organic waste segregation, and things like that. And I'm very pleased to share with you that partnership, the Too Good to Waste partnership, has get some really good results, right? If we compare and we are like living in a very good momentum, and that's why we think it's so important to have this discussion with other financial institutions like private banks and others, right? What we have right now is that the Inter-American Development Bank has multiplied its blended finance for the waste sector in Latin America by more than 4 times in 4 years, right? Growing from 24 millions per year to 99, almost 100 million per year, right? And that is, comparing 2015 to 2019 with 2021 to 2025, right? So that is a result, right? There is momentum there, right? And there is an opportunity. Of course, this is not enough at all, right? We are trying, like, working in the same approach with the World Bank, starting working on the same approach also with the African Development Bank, and we hope also to support more national development banks to have this and to get this mobilization, right? So good news, yes. Enough? Not at all. And as Yao was saying, right, we have an issue in the waste sector that it's related with the OPEX, right? And how to support that, how to build tools to support that. We were talking about carbon markets, all of us, mentioned that, but I want to bring another thing to the discussion, right? There is an ongoing discussion around the Science-Based Target Initiative, SBTI, right? And the update of that initiative, right? Under that discussion, there is a specific discussion about Scope 1 emissions, right? Which focus on fossil fuel consumption from different industries, right? And that discussion, together with initiatives such as iTrack, for example, which is a system designed to improve tracking and credibility of different credits like methane reductions and other things, might represent an important opportunity for biomethane landfills and anaerobic digestions, right? Why? Because as companies seek to strengthen their Scope 1 targets and reporting, there might be a greater recognition of the role of landfill gas capture, biomethane production, and anaerobic systems that can play, of course, a role in reducing methane emissions while also displacing fossil fuels, right? Like natural gas, for example, right? We have regulations in some countries about that, right? And now we have this opportunity, this opportunity is already working in Scope 2, meaning energy like electricity emissions, right? That are used by renewable energy, like replacing fossil fuel energy generation. And we might have the same opportunity for the waste sector based on these update SBTI targets for Scope 1 that might be, I hope, are going to be ready, right, by next year, right? So that might be a very good opportunity also and tool to support these actions, very aligned on the discussion that we are having and the opportunities that you are presenting in the report, right? So that's what we are trying to mobilize also and trying to support in terms of generating more demand, right, of the biomethane and the biogas production. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think, there's two important points there. One that there's a lot of people working in the space, and the hub's done an incredible amount of work these last few years, and especially with IDB kind of really the first out of the gates to scale up. But we're also working, as the Climate Policy Institute, as their report kind of showed, there's a massive gap in the amount of financing, and so we've got a lot of work to do to get ourselves out of this hole. My next question is for Adam. I'm wondering, how did you do the carbon accounting for this waste methane mitigation deal? And how do you assess credibility of waste methane deals in general?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I mean, rightly, there's a lot of focus these days on the carbon accounting mechanisms, and a word we hear a lot is quality of carbon claims or carbon credits that are being produced from these types of activities. So At BNP Paribas, we have an in-house methodology for assessing the carbon credit quality of that, and it really comes down to triangulating from a number of directions. So the first and the real gate at the start of the checks is the methodology that's being used. So in this case, we were using a methodology by the organization, the Gold Standard. It's their latest methodology on animal manure management, and it in terms of determining is this a good methodology or not, first we look at the date of it, but generally the more recent methodologies are better, so science and standards moves on. And secondly, we look at how third parties have viewed it. A particular benchmark for us in the particularly in the voluntary carbon market space is the ICVCM and their core carbon principles. That's a sort of quasi-regulatory body, voluntary within the voluntary market, who do third-party assessments of standards and methodologies and have approved this methodology. So it's reached sort of the highest independent bar, if you like, within the methodologies in the space. The methodologies and the projects themselves then get rated by third-party rating agencies. So examples of this are B0, Calix, Solvera, organizations that take an independent view of the quality, and you can pay for access to those on a one-off or a subscription basis. So we do that. And we also then hire science consultants to deep dive the underlying science and operations. And those are both important at different ends of the spectrum. So the science, we want to know the methodology is good today, but are there uncertainties in the carbon accounting that are going to be fixed later and then affect the perceived quality of what we did at the time, and hence the value of the credit today or the volume in the future? So we really want to make sure we're looking at as far as we can into science to check that there's not going to be any significant changes. And then next on operational matters. So methodologies are great on paper and in Excel, but you have to gather data in the real world. You have to go out and do farmer surveys. You have to take photos. You have to store data in a robust way. You have to have controls on that data so that it couldn't be tampered with, etc. So we need people to look into that side of it during our diligence as well to make sure that there couldn't be any issues with the data. I mean, very simply, how the methodologies work is you survey to work out the number of the herd that the farmer had and their baseline treatment of manure. There's then, based on the latest science and those facts, an estimate made of the emissions that methane that would have happened. Then, once you put it into the biodigester, there's an assumption of what happens in there in terms of any leakage, physical leakage that may happen, and the produce that comes out in terms of the biogas and the biofertilizer. So that is quite, Excel based and based on science, but importantly, on top of that, we do a digital MRV in the form of gas flow measurement. So you can do all the maths you want, but at the end of the day, there is an amount of gas coming out of that biodigester as biogas, and that really tells you what's being captured. So having that check on a sample basis of what's going on is really, really important for us. In this particular example, 90% of the emissions reductions come from the capturing of and destruction of methane, and about 10% comes because the biogas that comes out displaces unsustainable fuel wood and reduces emissions from deforestation, degradation that was happening associated with that fuel wood use.
Yeah, really insightful. And just a quick follow-up question. I'm curious, wastewater, agricultural waste, those, and I've been working in the space for a long time, and for years, especially, early stages 20 years ago, these sectors were often described as low-hanging fruit. And I think, still a little bit maybe harder to pick than people had hoped. And so I think there was like a waning of interest. But I do hear a lot more talk now, kind of renewed interest in methane and just super pollutants in general. And I'm curious, from the financial institution's perspective, how do they view methane credits in general? Is there still skepticism? Is there kind of renewed interest? Has it always been there? What's your kind of quick take on that?
Yeah, I think thank you to whoever branded methane credits super pollutants, because I think that has really helped cut through into the psyche of buyers. People are looking for stories often, particularly when we start in these ideas often start in the voluntary market, and there people are looking for, first and foremost, have been looking for stories to go alongside the climate mitigation they do. So I think the super pollutant really resonates and helps people place it alongside things like protecting forests, planting trees, which traditionally associated with carbon credit development. So I think that has really helped it. I think the push on quality. So over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a real interrogation of all the methodologies behind carbon credit production. And actually, methane sort of survived one of the best out of that. There's some that there haven't been significant issues that at least I'm aware of in this space. So I think it's proved relatively robust. I hear people talk about this as sort of like a ugly duckling type carbon credit, that when you really get down to actually, yeah, I mean, it is a super pollutant, very high global warming potential. Capture it, you can tend to measure that in a pretty robust way. These are real carbon credits, and as you said, the cost of doing that is often not that much. And there's the positive byproducts. There's the fact that in the case of Sistema Bio, households are not having to cook on 3 stones and sticks on the floor and have all the health impacts associated with that. We don't have the biodiversity loss through deforestation and degradation. So there's many social and biodiversity benefits as people dig into it that they see. And I think that's all come together now to say that these are financeable. And I think really the thing that's on the horizon that makes us like really excited is the under the UNFCCC, the Article 6, where you're allowed to do carbon trading between nations or between developers and nations for their counting under the UNFCCC to meet their NDCs. That they tend to operate at price points and have a contractual robustness that make that really attractive for financing. And I think now with the scope between the bottom of the voluntary market and the middle of the Article 6 market means, the bottom of the voluntary, these things work, but they're not super exciting. Up to the Article 6, then they get really interesting for investors. And I think going along that curve is where we can start to remove the blend, as the price goes up, we can remove the concessional elements to blended finance, and this can just become a full commercial model. And as I said earlier, even at that top end of pricing, that's still significant and potentially even orders of magnitude cheaper than other technologies. So I think it's something we're really interested to be getting involved in relatively early, because we do think it's going to scale, and there's a lot of excitement to come here.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. That's really encouraging news. And for the last question for the panel, for Zhao, from your perspective, especially for municipal solid waste, you've got a long history working in this sector. How has carbon finance worked for the waste sector? And, what insights can you share from your mechanism design, especially? I know you referenced it earlier, and just kind of curious how you take carbon accounting into account for the design of your financing mechanism.
I really like this discussion. I think what I would say now really complements a lot with what Adam has mentioned from, the nature capital kind of carbon credit market, touching upon methane. So we've done in our design work, we've done a kind of separate stream of research on the history of carbon financing for the waste sector, particularly municipal solid waste. So I mean, just very quickly, there was this CDM, and we looked at all the projects that were waste-related projects registered under CDM, and there were not more than 500 projects. And that's really, CDM was operating for more than a decade. That's a really small number. And parallel to that, we were involved in the CBI's re-update of the criteria on climate bond and green bond, and we had this, same observation on the bond issuance. Some of the responses to the reason why were mainly related to the cost. But I think also just if we look at the big picture of how many waste management projects in developing countries were financed, they were not many because they were not bankable. So that's the bigger picture. And if those projects were not built, they would not generate carbon credit anyway. But for those which nevertheless generated methane reduction or carbon CO2 reduction, it's quite expensive to register and monitor. I mean, if you listen to what Adam has talked about, the quality control, which is super important, but all these things cost. And if there's no, I think the market dynamic now is already better, easier, but still, it's difficult to get financing plus pre-financing to register and to achieve your operation to the point that you generate your carbon credit. And that's not only an issue for waste sector, but that's one issue. And in the global south, we often see smaller projects, which means the scale is smaller. So when you have a smaller project, the registration costs and monitoring nevertheless is high. So the ratio becomes even higher. Now we are entering a new era of carbon credit market. The voluntary market is kind of merging with the compliance market and the global Paris Article 6 markets. So that's quite exciting. Specifically to waste, we're still seeing that in nature, for example, you have buyers like BNP Paribas and many others, Amazon, Google, procuring projects directly. And they have their own methodology, they have their team to do that from the nature space. And the price of those carbon credits are also quite high. But waste projects are still sold as part of a portfolio, typically through traders. So typically you have buyers, like companies, let's say, buying a portfolio of project types. So a large volume of carbon credits from different sectors through traders. We are not seeing yet the interest of buyers like BNP Paribas directly into waste projects, and I hope that will change with the super pollutant scenario and story, because I think the methane story is really a good story and it's a reality, right? It's a super pollutant. So coming back to the design of our mechanism, we believe that one of the revenue streams needs to be strengthened among the several revenue streams of waste projects. So, and because we look at the impacts, right? So we started with looking at how can we provide finance to projects based on performance, and that performance should be impact. So that led us naturally think about methane reduction performance, and then it became very clear to us it's a very low hanging fruit because there's a market, there's methodologies, everything's in place. The only piece, I say only, it's not easy, but the only piece we have to work on is one, the mechanism has to provide long-term certainty to make the projects more bankable. So long-term offtake contract, and ideally also at a premium price. In return to that premium price, because with the premium price, we can really cover the project gap. And I mentioned the project gap currently stands at somewhere between 8 to 25, 26, let's say 8 to 30 US dollars per ton of waste. And that's compared to the price of carbon credits being paid for removal projects is really not expensive, as Adam mentioned. But the co-benefits really, I think we need to address two questions. One is the execution risk, as mentioned earlier. So to counter that, we are designing a TA facility, grant funded, that is to project prepare those projects. But also we aim to work with municipalities to look at their capability to increase their gate fee paying capability in the long term, so 5 to 10 years, because that's not an easy topic, but we believe in some places it's doable. And secondly, this story that we have heard, in the last 20 years, waste is not sexy. Waste projects are not sexy. We really have the opportunity to change that narrative using the potential of methane, and the co-benefit, the stories, as already mentioned by Carolina and Adam. So I think right now we have an opportunity to put forward the narrative to buyers and to financiers of carbon credits, buyers of carbon credits and financiers of those waste infrastructure projects, so that these projects can be, moved forward. We see our mechanism as an enabler. It's not your classical blended finance investment funds with first loss or, guarantee, but is really there to help with the, let's say, 5 to 8 years transition in increasing the capability of municipalities to pay gate fee. At the same time, really enable the buyers to see the story, to see the potential of how much methane can be reduced in the short term through waste projects, and how much impact, other impacts it can generate for the wider community.
No, thank you, Zhao. Really helpful answer. And blended finance, I think, looks different for different sectors. And I think the approach that Catalytic has taken really kind of shows your kind of deep understanding of the challenges when it comes to waste methane projects, especially kind of the operational challenges. I'll have to leave Zhao with the last word there. We are just at, or maybe just over time. Just a few kind of takeaways from the discussion and wrap up. Kind of what I heard from you all, and a lot of great content here. One, that there are definitely investment opportunities here. It's not a matter of there not being investable projects. A lot of times it's kind of recognizing the unique challenges. So especially in emerging markets, there might be an enabling environment or a robust commercial sector, but there's a lack of a pipeline of scalable projects. And so this is where project preparation can really come into play. Carbon credits definitely play an important role, but can be expensive, the registration process, and the lack of a unified carbon accounting or outdated methodologies means that there's may not recognize monitoring technology that's available or new applications. Things like black soldier fly and biocovers that we didn't even get to talk about today can inhibit the full valuation of a project. And finally, while carbon credits are really important, they're just part of a capital stack that includes, private and concessional financing. And so mechanisms really need to be tailored for kind of the unique challenges of the waste sector and its financing needs. And these are all things I think you did a great job of addressing. There were more questions that came in from the audience. If we were here live, we would, of course, give you a big round of applause for doing such a great job. And also then people could hound you afterwards. Since we don't have that chance, we will make a point to share questions with the panelists and do our best to provide answers. Don't worry, we're not going to give you homework. We will answer most of those ourselves, but we'll share the questions with everyone as a whole. And then finally, just encourage everyone to read our publication. It reflects all the people on the panel participated in the process, and more financial institutions, and we try to capture those insights. So I believe the link was dropped in the chat in the beginning, and we'll follow up with an email as well to make sure you have a chance. So with that, thank you so much for your time at time zones around the globe. Really appreciate great insights from you all. Thanks so much, everyone.